Have you ever wondered where the Isle would be if they took a different path? What state it might be in an alternate universe? I have. I've thought about it a couple times now. The only reason that I do so is because it feels like, if there are any infinite realities out there, that we're stuck in the worst timeline. It feels like every development block, accident, problem, mistake, they all seem to happen to the Isle. It's prone to development delays, poor content planning, masses of game-breaking bugs. Some of this is unavoidable, but to the point it is with the Isle, unlikely. Because of this, and the fact that people often criticize the development path that the devs have chosen for one reason or another, I wanted to quickly go over what might have happened if A. They decided to plop a dinosaur into each update that didn't have one, B. They decided to finish the game's mechanics before releasing Evrima with Omniraptor and Tenonto, and C. The developers established a proper roster before adding any mechanics past the initial release. Know that I can't be 100% accurate with these estimates, and I'll probably end up highballing some things and lowballing others, but I'll do my best. Not wasting any time, let's get into the first one. Many people have expressed dissatisfaction with the fact that the last 3 major updates have completely lacked a playable species addition. I mean, it's almost been a year and a half now. Only now are we finally getting more dinosaurs, and since over the course of a month or so we saw complete or mostly complete animations on at least 2 creatures that weren't complete beforehand, it shows to me that at any point they could have chucked in a dinosaur or 2, and it wouldn't have affected update speeds that heavily. If you need any more proof of this, look at Update 2. It released only 2 months after Update 1 with 3 dinosaurs. Now sure, some of them were being worked on before Update 1 came out, but even factoring in all possible time to develop these 3 going back to Evrima's launch, 4 including Dryo since it came out in Update 1, you get 1 dinosaur release per 1 month and 11 days, not to mention the handful of mechanics that these 2 updates also added. However, of course, since more mechanics have been added, the animation and programming times have gotten longer. As the devs have said before, each mechanic adds dinosaur time, and each dinosaur adds mechanic time. Let's assume that this is a significant number, and that for every dinosaur, the work for a mechanic increases by about 10%. Meaning that our current roster alone extends mechanic work by almost double the time. Let's also assume the same for the other way around, and that 10% of work has been added for each playable for each mechanic past Update 2. Let's be even more generous and say that Fractures added 20%, since they're very heavy on animations and programming. Now how much does this change update speeds? 1 extra dinosaur would increase the time required to make skins and nesting by 3 weeks or less. Assuming it was Ovi's edition, aka a creature made from the ground up, that would take them a little less than 2 months to make that specific dinosaur alongside it. Since they already had to deal with an Epic Games related issue for about a month, the release date wouldn't actually be pushed all too far back, likely coming out on August 29th at the latest, or a week after Night Vision's release in our timeline. Not only is this using possibly overinflated estimates, which may make it a shorter wait, but we can certainly shorten this wait in general if they were to not pick Ovi. Since they already expressed desire to make Gallimimus first, and since they explained that most legacy creatures are quicker to add in general, we can possibly shorten this date down by maybe a couple weeks or more, depending on how significant those legacy foundations help. This is something that we can do again with Dilophosaurus for Night Vision. Being a legacy creature, it would have likely been faster to make than Troodon, who would have taken 2 months and a week on average, and if we're cutting Gally's time down by about a quarter, we'll do the same for this guy, with Dilo taking 1 month and 3 weeks to make. And since Troodon is already being a testing nightmare, as well as just not being as cool, this is the better addition to make here. With 2 new dinosaurs to be adapted onto, Night Vision is done by September 3rd, as opposed to August 22nd, making this overall update's release an October 24th at the latest estimate, and could have easily turned the update into a Halloween update at that pace. Carrying on, this would have put our Gore update and Ceratosaurus at a probably middle-late May release at the latest, which isn't too far off considering we're almost in April and still don't have the 3 dinosaurs promised, which is basically the same as 3 updates having 1 dinosaur each. Yes, that makes Cerato anywhere between a few weeks to over a month late, depending on when it finally does release, but would you not trade that for having 2 other dinosaurs come earlier and have them be more interesting than the ones we're going to get? Pretty sure you would, considering the vast majority of people would prefer to see at least one of them get replaced with the ones I mentioned. And let's not forget for a moment that most of this is highballing the fuck out of the wait times. When you take into account that 2 of the current 3 we've been waiting on have been mostly complete or in testing for months now, despite them having worked on other updates. When you take into account the fact that Gore was most likely done long before the update itself released, and they waited so long to try and squeeze in things from the dev blog. When you take into account that Mothman Mikey was hired as far back as December at the latest, cutting Sarah's animation time down as well as other dinosaurs that come after, you could easily bring some of these updates forwards, but I think even with some highballing, it still sounds a lot more appealing than what we got. That's enough of playable additions for now. How about we try not getting any of them at all? At least not past our first couple. Let's take a look at a world where every gameplay cycle related mechanic was added before Evrima even released. How long would that have taken? Not as long as you'd think, since again, more dinosaurs equals more time spent initially making mechanics. Our current gameplay mechanics, diets, gore, and nesting, again using estimates of how long they took individually to add specific things, would have taken 7 months and a week, bringing development of Evrima to an end on about February 18th, 2021. Pile on roughly 3 months of work to make sure we have basic combat mechanics and AI, so that the diet system doesn't feel out of place and there's a middle of May release. If we wanted to go even further with it, we could look at their average update times for larger updates, and calculate how they'd be with only the 2 dinosaurs and add on our elders and perks too, which tacks on an extra 4 months and 10 days and brings us to a late September release for Evrima, with Utah and Tenno still, but at least the entire gameplay cycle for dinosaurs is complete. While this is probably the least appealing option to some out there, even if I'm highballing again, I think it's worth mentioning that in a world where Evrima never got any ETAs, people probably wouldn't have been as bothered by such a long wait, and I do think that it could have worked out better than what we have now. You could have expected a dinosaur edition roughly every 2.5 months, some taking longer due to needing left out mechanics like fractures, and some taking less time due to being legacy editions or already having a big head start with any free time the animators, sound designers, and programmers got whilst working on the release. Onto the final one, which completely flips the second on its head with heavy focus on playables over mechanics. Surely a bigger roster would have made some of the bi-yearly unfinished content drops a lot more bearable. I mean, you'd think that establishing a good roster of creatures in order to test the new mechanics to their entirety and figure out all their quirks would be more important, whilst also making it more fun to play the game. But let's see how long that would have taken them. We have to go about this differently to the current roster though if we want to end up saving genuine time in this route. Let's say we went with the current roster and the next 7 to 9 that they're working on. Whilst we would be able to cut away the diet and skin systems, most of the other systems would still have to be added to suit certain playables. Fractures are needed for Pecky, nesting is needed for Galli, Gore is preferred for Cerrado, and night vision is needed for Troodon. Not only this, but the current roster is not optimal in the way of making a satisfactory one. We have a good few creatures already that are not necessarily copies of other dinosaurs, but would definitely be better as something else if we wanted roster diversity. I mean, we need Hypsy, Dryo, and Galli. I don't think we need 3 runaways while the roster is in its infancy. We need Troodon and Dilo? Of course not. It's also arguable that something could have been put in place of Stego or Tenno, as they both focus on vicious back-end defense, but they're different enough for it to not be as bad. However, you could still argue that something could be there instead either way. If you wanted to be even more granular, Kano and Dino are both predators that excel when they get their drop on prey, and their main piece of kit is built around that. But ignoring those 2 instances, because there's still a lot that sets them apart, we know that we have at least 3 creatures that could very much be replaced, and we should try and keep heavily mechanic-reliant playables away from the roster for now. However, we will be adding Pecky still, so we'll need those fractures. This is being made an exception since fractures are primarily a combat mechanic anyway. To start with Update 1 housing Dryosaurus, Dryo continues to be the least played creature years later even after its dodge rework, often being completely unfindable on servers due to an undefined playstyle and different nerfs. We'll be slotting Pecky in here instead since Kana was next update anyway. This would have extended the time to make Update 3 by as much as 3 months when factoring in fractures, since a lot of the QA period was spent on finishing it. Rough start, but necessary. There's no reason as to why the next update would have taken longer than the time frame it already took, but in order to actually stick with the whole smaller animal approach, we'll be switching Stego out for Kentro, as I believe it's got a much more unique defensive attribute despite being a similar creature. which helps keep it fresh if you want to switch from a Tenno or Peki. The other two are the same, and with this we're looking at a late February release, let's say the 25th. This also still brings in Bleed and Flesh, so do remember that. That would be it as far as mechanics go, so every playable added from now on should take no more than a month and 3 weeks, disregarding Terra and Dino, which would take about double the time. However, due to not having Stego, and also because Dino can go fuck itself, we'll be replacing it with the defensive Baryonyx, giving us Barry and Terra in late August. So now with our defensive Fisher, Flyer, Ambush Sprinter, Pack Hunter, Runaway, Disabler, Damage Negator, and Backwards Defender, what are we missing? Well, first of all, how about we get a Frontal Aggressor in here with Diabloceratops, an actually decently sized one at that, releasing no later than October. That's our 9 dinosaurs right there. And while it's a bit herbivore heavy, and you could argue a switch for maybe Megalania or something else, it definitely does a better job than what we have now, I think. Since we're months ahead of Peki's normal release at the latest, we can always go with some more just to see how far we can get until hitting our current time. How about we chuck in Allosaurus or Albertosaurus? All depends on whichever of the two is the endurance predator, because I have no idea at this point. How about after that we even throw in Maya for a trampler based creature, as well as Megalania for that venom brawler. And to further fill out the mid-tiers, we'll chuck in Maggie afterwards for that straight-up crowd control fighter, and Herrera for that opportunistic ambusher. 14 mostly anticipated creatures, all fairly different from each other and not going too crazy with sizes, likely all done by October 2022 at the latest. Likely earlier due to legacy porting and possible highballing with the Peki update and some others. If we wanted to make it to now or the end of March, we'd have to push out 3 more dinosaurs, so we could always top it off with the Spino Rex Trike Trio. It's a bit crazy considering our sizes, but why not, right? At the end of the day, this is just a hypothetical. And remember, we could have cut off Peki and the Swimmers and Flyers for even more time saved and things added if we really wanted to. But yeah, that was all. To me, assuming I wasn't going too low on my estimations, all of these sound better than what we got, without what they have to work on afterwards being too hard to deal with. Perfect? Maybe not, but they sound nice, and I feel like this little part of my life would have been so much simpler had one of these been followed instead. I hope that one day the Isle can get its shit together, not just in terms of its planning, but in general. If you preferred any of these, let me know in the comments below, and if you didn't, let me know why not. Also, if you enjoyed, you can always subscribe, it takes you a second and you'll be notified for all my content. That being said, thank you for watching, and thank you for my patrons for helping support this channel. If you want to get news on upcoming content, previews for some of my videos, or even make direct suggestions for videos, you can go to the link in the description and check it out. I'll see you all next time, everybody. Goodbye.